The names Kane, Nick Kane to my friends, Nickolaus to my parents, and Mr. Kane to every sleazebag within 30 miles of Chicago. I'm a sex detective, you see, and the best goddamn sex detective in Chicago. Unkind folks say that's because I'm the only one in Chicago, but the truth is there could be 50 of us and I'd still rise to the top, like cream, or pond scum. I learned my trade in San Fran from the original sex detectives, Bob and Freddie. They taught me that you crack the case whatever it takes, whether that means swallowing a mouthful of baboon semen with a smile on your lips or suffering the attentions of a boat full of horny Turkish sailors who haven't seen a fresh piece of ass in 6 months. It doesn't matter. You take the hand that's dealt and you crack the case. Of course, if there's one thing a sex detective knows, it's that sometimes you have to bend the rule until it snaps like a hooker's inhibitions in the face of an ounce of blow and $500. And this story is about one of those times when I had no choice but to kick the dealer in the nuts and claim it was a Royal Flush a lot, Illinois. Like most of my cases, this one started with a phone call, one that woke me up from a steamy dream about a threesome featuring myself, Brad Pitt, Denzel Washington, and a vat of hollandaise sauce. As I struggled back to consciousness, I discovered that my neighbor's cat had left the half-eaten mouse on my head again. Whether it was critiquing my hairstyle or simply trying to be friendly I couldn't say, but one day I'd figure out how the little hairball kept getting into my office. Of course I answered the phone with my usual savoir-faire. 5 more minutes, mommy. Mickey darling, I'm not your mommy and it's past noon. Time you were up and at 'em. I recognized those dulcet tones straight away. It was Babs, the proprietor of Chicago's hottest gay club, the Exile, and the sweetest little drag queen to ever crush walnuts between his perfectly toned butt cheeks. Babs was also the only person I'd ever let call me Nicky. We'd had an on-again, off-again love affair for the past 5 years that would have been far more on if I'd been able to give up the sex detective gig and get a stable job, but I was too addicted to sniffing the world's dirty underwear, and Babs deserved someone who would always be there for him. Babushka, whatever can this poor weary soul do for you today? I've got a job for you, Nicky. My ears perked up at that. It had been a couple of weeks since my last case and my wallet was getting depressingly thin. The job, one that Frankie can't handle. Tell me more. We've been getting complaints about a strange smell and noises coming from the toilets. Babs, I'm a sex detective, not a plumber. Why the hell are you calling me? Because I've already had the plumber out and apparently everything is in perfect working order. If you do this for me, darling, I'll clear your tab. Damn, he really knew my weaknesses. A clean bar tab was worth crawling on broken glass for. I'll be there as soon as I wash the dead mouse out of my hair. Dead mouse? No, I don't want to know. See you soon, darling. A quick shower later and I was driving through Chicago in my old Roadrunner, munching on a slice of stale bread covered in salad dressing. I really needed to get some shopping. Sure, this case seemed unworthy of my talents, but if there's one thing a sex detective knows, it's that you can't judge a porno by its cover. I'll admit most of the time what's on the box is what you get. But sometimes there's a midget in Maryland Road. Drank inside. As I pulled up to the curb I wasn't surprised to see Frankie at the door. Now for those of you poor slobs unacquainted with Chicago's gay scene and the Exile, Frankie is the doorman, bouncer, head of security, and the only man I'm genuinely afraid of aside from Mr. Mulligan, my kindergarten teacher. There's a stereotype that gets bandied about that gay men are sissies who couldn't fight their way out of a paper bag, but no one who ever met Frankie would believe that. He's just under 7 foot of solid muscle and scars. He's ex-Special Forces to boot. And the rumor goes that he was court-martialed after eating his commanding officer's dog for a bet. Something I could easily believe. And no matter how tempted you are, never ask him if he's been to Hollywood, as he doesn't have anything close to a sense of humor. But on the plus side, even the most fervent of bigots soon learn the joys of tolerance after a few minutes of his tender ministrations. Hey Frankie, Babs asked me to come over. Okay if I go on in? After staring at me for a few seconds he slowly nodded his scarred, bald head and opened the door so I could step into the foyer of the Exile. The Exile, every time I visit I have to stop for a moment to savor the sight. Babs had a vision when he built this place, and he didn't cut corners on anything. The finest leather and marble imported from Europe, a hand-carved mahogany coat check table, genuine works of art, deep red carpets, and a stuffed pink flamingo on each side of the doors for some reason. Of course Babs couldn't have afforded all that by himself. In fact, I first met him while investigating his blackmailing of several prominent senators and congressmen from his time as a Washington Brent boy, and I still think the Exile is the best misappropriation of tax dollars in this country's sordid history. All too soon Babs was prodding me in the ribs to remind me that I was here for a job. He was almost as stunning as the decor, wearing a stylish pink Armani women's suit hand-tailored for him. His blonde highlighted shoulder-length hair was carefully styled to frame his soft, clean-shaven face, and his lipstick was a dark mulberry shade, my favorite. "How do I look?" he whispered coquettishly as he did a little twirl in front of me, before laughing at the hungry growl that was the only response I could make. "Business first, tiger, pleasure later perhaps, that is if you do a good job." I stared at his ass in frustrated lust as he sauntered towards the toilets. I had to punch myself in the crotch 4 or 5 times to convince my hard-on to go away. Damn it, if there's one thing a sex detective knows, it's that you have to think with your head and not your dick. But Babs was special, always had been and always would be, so with a mournful sigh and a whimper of delayed pain I scuttled after him. The toilets in the Exile were of the same kind of quality as the rest of the place and were possibly the cleanest, nicest toilets in Chicago. In fact, this was the first time I'd ever smelled anything more unpleasant than the sweat and bodily fluids of the couple fucking in the stall next door. As it was, it took all my self-control to keep from puking my guts up at the rancid odor that wafted up my nose. It was worse than an unwashed baboon, worse than being thrown face-first into a hillbilly's outhouse and taking 3 hours to climb back out. It was as if someone had taken a Godzilla-sized dump, sprinkled it with half a dozen rotting skunks, and then added a bucket of distilled raw sewage. I gazed at Babs to see only a slight look of disgust on his face. "How the hell can you just stand there like that?" "I spent the summer working at a mortuary when I was in college. This is bad, but I've smelt worse." Before I could inquire as to what could be worse than this stench, I was interrupted by a high-pitched moaning, coming from one of the cubicles. I glanced sideways at Babs. "I'm assuming that's the strange noise. Has anyone looked in there?" Babs flashed a perfect smile at me. "That's why you're here. Go get them, Nicky." Steeling myself, I gently pushed the cubicle door open, ready to run at the first sign of trouble. I don't know what I was expecting to see in that cubicle, maybe a yeti with diarrhea I suppose, but what I got was a flickering white, almost translucent image of a fat midget in a socks cap and hoodie. I stood staring at him as he floated back and forward through the toilet bowl. "Fuck," I said, "you're a ghost? Hey, do you suck your dead mother's phallus with that mouth, asshole?" "I prefer living Jim Baird. It's a hate crime to call me a ghost, and I'll go to the press and tell them all about it." I stared in disbelief at the dumpy little specter. Of all the possibilities in heaven and hell, I had to deal with Casper the douchebag ghost. "Excuse me a moment." I stepped back, closing the toilet door as I went, and turning to Babs. "Well, you're haunted. Only 2 ways to take care of it. Either you get a priest in, which is pretty unlikely given the club's reputation." Babs interrupted, "What's the other option?" "We find out what his unfinished business is and help him take care of it so he's free to move on. It might be expensive though." "Nicky, do you think I can't possibly open with my toilets smelling like that?" "Whatever it takes, as you always like to say." I'd hoped that Babs would be able to get a priest in to exorcise the little bit, but it looked as though when push came to shove it was up to me, and if there's one thing a sex detective knows, it's how to push, though usually it's pushing something up someone else's rectum. "All right, Babs, I'll try to find out what's keeping him here and we'll take it from there." Muttering a prayer to whatever deity might be listening, I pushed open the door to the cubicle again. "Hey, Mr. Living Impaired," I said cheerfully, "mind if we have a little chat, man to X-Men?" I watched as he floated there for a few seconds, turning what I had said around in his head, trying to see if it was in any way insulting. I barely managed to repress a shudder as I watched an ectoplasmic bead of drool form at the corner of his mouth and dribble down his goatee to land on the floor. Clearly I wasn't dealing with an intellectual titan here. "All right, father fucker, but call me Nickolaus because that's my name, Nickolaus Pacione." and I was the greatest horror writer in all of Chicago before I was accidentally smothered to death in my sleep sack.